Hey everybody, Dr. Nick here. I just finished a great recording for the Hospitality Spirit with Timothy Lyon and Peter Wolniak from American Airlines. We had a great conversation about their careers in the airline industry, their history, how they got into their current roles, some trends for the airline industry, and some pointers for if you're interested in going to work for the airlines, what you should focus on. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Hey everybody, it's Dr. Nick here. I am so excited to have you on the Hospitality Spirit, recorded live at the corner of State and Jackson in downtown Chicago. This has been a podcast that I've been really excited to do. As you've heard me talk about on previous podcasts, I'm a big AV geek. I love aviation. So to have our first guest from an airline in here today is super exciting. It's also, I think, very fortuitous that in about 90 years ago, 1926, Charles Lindbergh flew the first airline flight, furthest airline, from St. Louis to Chicago. So here we are in Chicago recording with our great friends and supporters from American Airlines. So I am joined today by Tim Lyon, Managing Director of Domestic Revenue Management, Pricing and Yield for American, as well as his colleague, Peter Wolniak, the Senior Key Account Manager with American Airlines. Gentlemen, thank you for being here on the Hospitality Spirit today.
Hey,
thanks for having us.
Thank you.
We got a lot of directions that we can go with this, but I think it might be beneficial for us to start briefly, just talking briefly if each of you could maybe talk about your current role with American, and maybe just briefly, and I'll interject a couple places, but maybe briefly just about your career trajectory up to this point. Tim, you and I were just talking. You've been with American for quite a while, so really eager to kind of hear how you got there. I think there are probably some people listening today saying, you know what, I love aviation, this is what I want to get into, but I haven't had a chance to hear about what a career path looks like.
Okay.
So,
okay, Nick.
Tim, maybe just tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got here.
Okay. So I started with America West Airlines, who in 2001, who merged with U.S. Airways and then eventually American 5 years ago. And I started out in revenue management and have been in that group through all of those years. The revenue management group is broken up into a few different functions, and pricing and yield management, and then some other specialty groups that work on analysis, operations research, and then like ancillary fees and some of the distribution sides of things work together to create the outcome in revenue management.
So we've had people on the podcast before that are really interested in revenue management in hotels. We've had people come in and talk about it from a food and beverage standpoint. Just so we're on the same page, when you say revenue management at the airlines, can you just give a quick snapshot of what that entails?
So essentially at airlines, the schedules are put together by the network planning group. Then those schedules are finalized and handed down to all the systems, and the revenue management team then goes and looks at the capacity, what flights exist, what connections exist, what products are on those planes, and tries to determine what's the best way I can go about selling these seats and gathering the most revenue on these planes that are going to be flying around, whether it be nonstop traffic, whether it be connecting traffic, whether it be international traffic, international point of sale, or domestic point of sale. If it's corporate stuff I need to go after, and measuring lots of things in our data and trends, and just trying to make sure the demand is there to fill those seats, and then what dollars can I charge for each of those seats to maximize the outcome on a route and for the whole network.
Got it. So how did you get there? How does one get to this role that you're in right now?
Okay. Yeah. Lots and lots of numbers is what we deal with on the revenue management side. I from my perspective, I worked to try to direct projects. I love the airline industry from the start. And so when I was going through college, I tried to put all the business projects with my marketing degree towards the airline industry. And so with that, then I put together a whole portfolio and sent it out to the airlines. And I got a couple bites, and America West is where I ended up. But definitely the numbers side of things is the thing you focus on when you get there. And even as the interview process goes you're faced with the interview process. It's numbers and making sure the strategic concepts, and you can get your head around things that what's the strategy here, what's the maximization here, and how does math work together and modeling work together to put the systems together, the pricing together, and create that revenue stream.
So with that, I mean, it clearly we've seen some pretty significant advances in technology, but at its core, has the revenue management function at the airline really changed dramatically in 18 years, or is it still at the end of the day making sure you got the right people on the right planes, flying the right routes, and paying the maximum fare they could?
Yeah, the things that have changed are, I guess, the pace. A lot of the changes in pricing, the changes in networks wasn't as fast-paced as it is today. Now and then, 20, 25 years ago, you would hear like a sale would be like something the media would grab. And now sales are so regularly out in the marketplace that it's every day you're hearing this, that, or the other on social media. You can find sales all the time. Route changes and the number of carriers, there has been consolidation, but at the same time, carriers make moves so fast that I think just the pace of information, the pace of price changes, it's a lot that's consumed by the revenue management departments and the airline as a whole, and dealing with a lot of that data. It's gone to be, big data is a buzzword to a certain extent, but at the same time, the airlines are going and scanning what's happening in the marketplace, and it turns and changes so fast that our response times have to be real fast versus kind of sitting and waiting till the next big action. It's constant activity right now.
Interesting. Peter, don't want to leave you out. Want to let you get your introduction in here. So maybe tell us a little bit about what your role as Senior Key Account Manager is, and briefly how you got to this point with American.
Sure. So my role as a Senior Key Account Manager here in Chicago is basically working on our global sales side. So I'm part of the global sales and distribution organization, which is different and separate from the revenue management organization. However, as you know, like with hotels and car rentals, airlines, a lot of our business lives and thrives off of the corporate, high-value, high-frequency travelers, if you will. So to take that a little bit deeper, we work with corporate travel agencies, if you will, who serve as sort of middlemen in the travel industry in general for larger corporations. So my role, sort of in parentheses, is to be the liaison between American Airlines and such third-party agencies, which then distribute our content to the end corporate customer. How I got here, a little bit unconventional, if you will. So I am born and raised in Chicago here. I went to Auburn University, where I studied aviation management, actually, similar to DePaul, housed within the School of Business. I attained a minor in economics, which when it was all said and done, I chose American Airlines Revenue Management as my entry point into the industry. And I will say that it's a great department, I would say, regardless of industry, to start in the hospitality realm. You really learn the nits and grits and the ins and outs of how a company makes its money, right? Which I think then allows you to springboard and be sort of nimble and get into other departments, if you will, if that suits your sort of career trajectory. So I've been with American for about 5.5 years, and I've been with American since I graduated college.
That's great. If I'm going to make an assumption that the vast majority of people listening to this are familiar with American, but I'd love to kind of hear you talk a little bit about why you love working at American. What is it about the culture that really gives you? I mean, you've been there multiple years. You've been there multiple years, Peter, and Tim. Explain a little bit about that idea of culture. And the reason I asked that is I was having a conversation the other day with somebody, and we were talking about in travel, tourism, and hospitality, the roles and the responsibility of one company versus another aren't dramatically different. What people are really looking for is, how does this organization's culture fit with me? And that really becomes a deciding factor for many, whether they're current students or when they graduate, where they're going to go work. So I always love to hear from people, what is it about your particular company that you love? Mm-hmm.
So at American and really in the airline industry, it's about making connections between people in far-flung places. One of the big drivers that a lot of people have is they love putting people together and getting people, on their trip, to their business trip, to, funerals, weddings, all the things that they need to do to get from one place to another, and being able to grow, a business, support the airlines, support the communities that we fly to. So it's all kinds of surroundings and all kinds of destinations and types of people that you're supporting as an airline. Now, internal like corporate culture, we are a very diverse company, and we have lots and lots of initiatives to try to even make ourselves more diverse from the top down. And so those are some things that I think we have many different business groups from different ethnicities and religions and different types of people that can support different types of backgrounds. And it's something that we're growing. And when it comes to how the culture comes together, we've got many things going on in different cities that focus on what can I do for this community and for this batch of employees, to make sure that everybody's headed in the same direction. But it's positive. We just moved into a new headquarters building that's a big investment in the employee base. And if you get the chance, come down one of these days. But it's amazing. We went from a pretty 1980s, 1970s style limited windows, cube walls to this brand new facility that has people throwing cornhole out in the courtyards and no cube walls, very open concept, and a great place to meet up versus kind of what a lot of people referred to as a prison type feel prior to. So it's a big improvement on what we had before.
And I would imagine being in Dallas-Fort Worth, everything's bigger in Texas.
Oh,
so
that is true.
It's
probably
a massive facility.
Yeah, we've got a whole campus. Everybody's going to end up on the same campus, and this is one of the big moves across training from pilots and operations side of things. And we'll have a conference center there, so everybody will be able to get out and about and interact with each other across the whole company.
That's interesting. But before I move on to you, Peter, Tim, you mentioned the issue of diversity. Mm-hmm. And I think this is so important that when I hear people come in and they talk about this issue of diversity, it is a key foundational pillar within organizations. And I'm curious, so the most recent numbers that I saw was American, so we got 350 destinations, 50 different countries. I mean, just that in itself must add a level of diversity, and really it must just be fascinating. I mean, because you essentially have employees in all these 50 countries that need to be there, whether it's a hub or it's just kind of a small feeder market on the spoke. I mean, I'd imagine that has a lot to do with the diversity of the company.
No, it pulls people in, and we have many languages we need to speak on our planes, and many languages in the headquarters and the sales teams that interact with the customers in those areas. And then the airline itself, because people can get to different places, we actually pull in a different type of candidate who can travel, maybe where they're from. And our company sponsors, visas, and in a way I think that's at least a higher quantity than a lot of other companies do right now. And so we have a pretty hefty set of people that have built upon many generations that are doing a lot of good work, and it continues to go forward.
That's great. Peter, how about you? What do you love about American?
So what struck me first when I came on, and I joined the company about a year into the merger with U.S. Airways, and for lack of better words, a lot of changes were happening. But what I was really taken back by was the opportunity that American gives for employees to hang out and collaborate with themselves. There's numerous clubs internally, externally, company-wide, travel clubs, you name it pretty much. Going from a historically sort of a top-down, white-collar organization really sort of took some changes to make people feel a little bit more comfortable in the workplace. So I think that's something that really resonated with me, as well as I know other colleagues who have been there for, for example, many decades. It sort of brought in a breath of fresh air, which I would say is still pretty much the same atmosphere. To echo Tim's point, a brand new headquarters, going to an open atmosphere where, correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, but the CEO has the same exact cubicle as an analyst. No one's really different than the other, and to have that sort of open concept, I really just kind of breaks down the barriers physically, but also sort of from a workplace, from a colleague perspective, really allows you to network and maximize those connections. So I think that's something that really stands out.
That's great. That's really great to hear. I think a misconception that some people will have listening to this is that I don't want to go work for an airline because I don't want to be a pilot, or I don't want to be part of the cabin crew. But one of the things that I really love about having you two here is because you don't fit into one of those few job descriptions. And there are so many opportunities to go work in the airline industry. So with that, I'm really kind of curious, and you don't need to get into too much granular detail, but I'm really curious what a week in the life might be. I mean, you have two vastly different jobs, yet they're similar, and they're all kind of tracking on the same course for the final objective. So maybe Peter, what is a typical week? I mean, you've kind of mentioned briefly that you're kind of the middle person
Sure.
between travel agencies and corporations and the airline. But
Correct.
I mean, what does a week look like for you?
So pretty much like with every sort of sales role, we have goals set with our customers. So my primary objective, whether it's a weekly or a monthly or a quarterly goal, is to make sure that my account is progressing on track with their forecast and meeting their numbers up to par. Now, if they're not meeting numbers up to par, it could be a variety of things. It could be an operational slowdown in one of our hubs that affected performance over a certain period of time. There could be some incentives in the marketplace, which no one is really strangers to in our realm of the world. And also, I would say one of the bigger parts is maintaining those personal relationships. I mean, you'd be surprised how much further an in-person conversation will take you versus an email or a phone call or even a Skype. I mean, as awesome as those things are to connect people with, really nothing beats face-to-face meeting with the customer and making them feel comfortable with you. It takes you miles, really. On top of that, we liaison closely with our headquarters team, which pretty much creates such contracts. We collaborate with them internally to make sure that what we're giving the customers also suffices our needs from a bottom line perspective as well.
So when we teach service management, when we teach at the undergraduate level, but also at the graduate level, we talk a lot about this concept of relationship marketing, that it is sometimes more cost effective to maintain existing relationships with customers and enhance that relationship over time, as opposed to going out and finding new customers that maybe are not familiar with your project. I mean, would you kind of agree with that? Are you constantly going out and looking for new, or is it about maintaining relationships with existing?
I agree. You know, there's a school of thought to this. It kind of relates to value-based selling, what is common sort of in the industry, where you have transactional selling, which is you give me $1.50, I give you a hot dog, and then you move on to the next customer. The real value-based selling is taking the time to get to know their needs, get to know their challenges, if you will, over time, to really create a platform of a relationship that can take you to that next level. It's not so much as guaranteeing a quality service on all of your flights, despite of where this customer may go. It's really developing the trust with your counterpart on the other side of the business to make sure that those relationships are secure and sound, and most of all, long-standing, especially in a hyper-competitive industry as we work. To Tim's point, it's very interesting to see consolidation, yet a big increase in competition, not just in the RM world, but definitely on the sales side, on the product side. The next big accomplishment, whether it's free Wi-Fi on flights or whatever, I mean, that's going to set the new standard, right? So we always have to be able to adjust and be nimble in that realm. Yep.
So Tim, I've counted 3 times the word consolidation has been said. For those not familiar with what you're referring to when you say this term, and it's not uncommon in the airline industry, could you just briefly explain what you're kind of referencing with this concept of consolidation?
So if you look back to the early 2000s, there was something 8 or 9 major U.S. airlines And now we're at the point where there's really about 4 major airlines. You could consider Alaska Airline a major airline. And so the size of each airline is double or more what it used to be after that consolidation and the growth over a few years. And so there was lots of worry that, there'd be market power and pushback on all the carriers, increasing fares and all kinds of customer downside. But really, it's made the competition and the prices continue to decrease, which is the opposite of what the worry was. So at this point in time, these big 4 carriers make up something like 80% of all the seats out there. That's continuing to be chipped away by smaller carriers like Spirit and Frontier, who are growing at a rapid pace. But hyper competition is really what we're living in, even with fewer airlines out there.
So I'm going to get to your week in the life question in a second, but just to build upon that, for people that are listening that also want to kind of learn a little bit more, consolidation is very different than alliances. So could you maybe just talk a little bit about what an alliance is? And because they say, that's similar, but it's quite different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So alliance with airlines, because we have networks that create actual connections for customers when they're traveling from point A to point B. Alliances often allow an airline to expand its network to a city it doesn't fly to with its own airplane. So, for example, at this point in time, we don't fly to South Africa. American Airlines doesn't, but our partner British Airways does. And so we'll send a customer from Chicago to London. And then an alliance with British Airways allows us to go and then send a customer on to South Africa. So we can sell a Chicago to South Africa OND, or origin and destination, I guess is the translation. So many alliances around the world come together to expand networks. And then there's partnerships you work on to go and work with corporations and build upon the benefits of both sides and help the customer base out. And sometimes then you get into approvals with the government that get to some antitrust agreements and whether you can really work together on pricing and network outcomes.
Mm-hmm. And it's pretty significant. I mean, the data that I saw recently was Americans doing on average about 6,700 flights a day. Mm-hmm. But if you take into all those alliances, the number just goes up exponentially. So there could be, Peter, one of your customers on one of those alliance routes if they have to get to Cape Town or Johannesburg, something like that. So they're extremely important to do and to have.
Yeah, especially when you get to and then the foreign point of sale customer, the customers that live in the foreign destinations, they may not know your brand or they'd rather work with the brand that they're used to. And so both sides get a benefit of, what's the selling strategy in that marketplace versus what it is in your home country? And you learn quite a bit back and forth, and there's that shared benefit.
Yeah. And to complement on your comment just about growth and expansion, even though the consolidation has occurred, each one of the 3 megas, if you will, for all intents and purposes, continues to grow. For example, I started back in 2014 in Dallas. We were just doing over 700 flights a day. Now we operate 900 flights a day, a short 5 years later with a huge incremental increase. So that just goes to show that not only us, but each one of these legacy airlines continues to find new opportunities to grow in the marketplace.
That's great. So Tim, the week in the life question.
Okay.
Back to you. So you're based in Dallas.
That's right.
You flew up here from DFW. What does a week in the life of the Managing Director of Domestic Revenue Management look like?
Okay, and I'll probably even go down to the analyst level, but many of the commercial corporate headquarters-based jobs are 8 to 5, 9 to 6 type jobs, and they're 5 days a week. So we have in revenue management, we have the pricing group, and a pricing analyst will come in, and what we end up doing is looking at the fare changes that happened most recently. And so there's a clearinghouse in Washington, D.C., where many of the pricing changes happen, and we receive the latest price change that happened. The analyst will go and scan those fares, go and decide how to respond, run through some processes, and send those out, and go. Then the rest of their day, there's a couple more transmissions that happen. They also go and try to decide with their counterparts and with the reports and data that they have in front of them, what adjustments might I need to make, what's going well, what's maybe falling off, either in bookings or specific routes. And that's most of what their day is balancing that and kind of what's the competition doing and looking a bit externally.
And are they empowered at that moment to say we got to go up or down in this fare, or is it something that needs to go up the flagpole, for lack of a better term? And
so many of these changes actually probably 80 to 90% of an analyst's pricing analyst's work is responding to another carrier, and then the rest of it ends up being something that's actually initiative of the airline, because we're mostly a commodity business, so you're just making sure you're set up to be at the point you need to be with the competition, and then the rest is actually moving things yourself. So they are empowered in many cases on a route basis. If it's a bigger initiative, oftentimes it will have to go a bit up to managers and above sometimes, but they do have lots and lots of ability to go and make individual changes. Our network domestic only is 30,000 origin and destination pairs. And within each of those, you end up having sometimes hundreds of fares. So we have millions of fares that exist. And so there's many things an analyst can do and has the ability to go and test things large and small. And you learn from the failures and the successes to go say, here's what I learned small scale. Is there something else where this applies, to go and apply it much more broadly?
Are they looking solely at quantitative data? And the reason I ask that is we've had people that do revenue management in the hotel industry on the podcast, and they say a lot of it is just also staying updated on current events, what's going on. If we use the analogy of if a huge band, the Rolling Stones or somebody, all of a sudden announces their tour and they're going to be in this particular city, that's really germane and relevant to pricing tickets. Mm-hmm. And so are they also looking at that sort of information?
So that moves me on to the second group in revenue management. So the first one, the pricing group, puts the products on the shelves and the dollar amounts that they're willing to sell the seats at. The second group is called yield management, and they end up deciding, okay, what price levels that are already out there do I need to sell to fill up my airplane most optimally? So on a Tuesday afternoon in September, I might not have that much demand, so I have to sell a whole bunch of seats on the lowest product. And on a Friday before 4th of July, maybe I can go and sell a whole bunch of the highest fare in the market. So yield management analysts looking at similar types of data, but more internally focused to say what's the most optimal for AA on this given route based on historical data and things that I observe, or like you said, the event that's coming up. I have the Super Bowl is in Miami this coming year. It wasn't last year, but I'm somebody who knows that whenever that event happens, that I have to do something different to capture the correct dollar amounts and ask for a bit more because I know there's a spike there. So they're looking a bit more on a microscopic basis internally, and then seeing if cities have different things going on that influence upward or downward.
Could that also be, I remember just recently there was a lot of really great fanfare about the retirement of the MD-80s. So one of the, and you've got the new Airbus coming on, the Neo, and does all that as well, the types of aircraft that you might be retiring and new ones that you might be acquiring, does all that go into the equation as well?
Yeah, those go, they come from the network planning group, and when the schedule's solidified, we actually sell most of our tickets starting about 330 days prior to departure. And so sometimes you have an initial assumption on what plane's going to fly a route, and that might change. But really things solidify pretty heavily on long-haul routes by 6 months out. sometimes a bit longer, and then more so in the 120 days out on the domestic side. Then you really know whether it's going to be 150 seats or 200 seats or 100 seats, and then it's pretty concrete what you need to hold out for, or how you have to open your seats up. But revenue management sometimes goes back and forth and asks for something bigger on a route if they see opportunity or some sort of upward trend. But most of that is passed down from the network planning side.
So is there a counterpart for each of those two respective areas that you mentioned that looks solely at international as well? Based in Dallas too? Or?
Yeah, so the current split for our revenue management group is we do have a completely different revenue management wing under the same vice president that deals with transatlantic, Latin, and the Pacific side of things. And then domestic is under myself. Both sets are pretty large, and then of course international gets a bit more complex. But they're headed towards the same goals, but often international has more partners, multiple customers from different countries and points of sale. Even fares are filed differently in different currencies and different dollar amounts because your European demand and willingness to pay more if you're a walk-up customer versus not is just different. So it's pretty complex on both sides, and international is a bit more so.
Interesting. So I think one of the things that a lot of faculty here do, and I know at other institutions, is we really encourage students to stay updated on current events, what's going on in the industry. Regardless of what segment of hospitality and tourism, having a knowledge of these trends and what's hot, what's not, et cetera, is extremely important, not just to apply the concepts for class, but also as they transition out into the industry, they're going to need to know these things. And Peter, if you're with a customer and they want to talk about something, or you have a new aspect of the airline that you'd like to promote, having a knowledge of that is really important. So the sooner we can start the students in gathering that information is really critical. I'm curious, what are the trends in the airline industry as a whole right now that both of you are looking at, that if you were someone listening to this, that maybe a year from now, a couple of years from now, was going to transition into this segment of travel and tourism, that they would absolutely want to have on their radar?
To your point about staying on top of current events, and this probably goes to Tim's side more than mine, but it never hurts to be educated even on the most minuscule, we call them opportunities. As much as our systems advance and can help us forecast accurately, the system can't really tell you when Easter shifted, right? The system can't really tell you that Yom Kippur is in a place this month where it hasn't been previously. And of course, that sort of a holiday has severe implications on, especially corporate travel. So that's something that the machine cannot forecast for you. So it really never hurts to be in tune with not only what's going on in your marketplace, in your geography, in your sector of the world, because it has huge revenue implications down the line. So that's what I'll say about current events.
Yeah, a little bit of updates to systems where customers are buying. If Google Flights growth, I believe, has been double digits or triple digits over the course of a couple years, and if somebody like that comes out of nowhere, where Expedia and Expedia's arms control quite a bit of the OTA side of things, and Google Flights is building up and maybe eating somebody else's lunch or eating your own website's lunch, that's something you may want to pay attention to and see what they're doing that might be driving something like that. New competitors, I guess, is pretty relevant, because just knowing if there's different business models out there that are slightly different than what you've seen before is pretty interesting to follow, and somebody may not have paid attention to what they're doing, and you could learn quite a bit from it.
How does this? I looked at your website, and there was quite a lot of information on sustainability. That was a really big aspect of American and your culture. How does sustainability come into to factor at all in either of your areas of work, whether fuel efficiency, carbon emissions, things like that. Is that something that you take into consideration?
It's not on the revenue management side, I would say. I mean, our part of the new building is LEED certification, and there's a whole batch of things that went into that to make sure we're progressing in that sense. And another airline side of things is we have the youngest fleet out of the big carriers. So investing in aircraft that are 20% or more efficient than the previous ones that we've had is an initiative in itself. I think to a certain extent, versus our competitors, we're a little further behind because our merger was more recent and we haven't progressed across some of those things to make it top of mind. But it is something the airlines really do need to focus on because in Europe, you may have heard of some of the flight shaming side of things that has happened in at least the Nordic countries. And so Doug Parker, our CEO, even today mentioned something about one of his counterparts said that their travel quantity is down something like 5%, and they believe a bunch of it is on the back of people telling others you shouldn't be flying because this is bad for the climate.
Interesting. So as we kind of wrap up, one of the questions that I really like to pose to guests who are on the podcast is any advice that they would give for people wanting to, whether they're hospitality and tourism students, somebody may be working in a different segment of hospitality and tourism, midlife career changers, about if they wanted to make an entree into aviation or the particular segment that the guest is from. What advice would you give to students that are considering going into this aspect of business? And then maybe what are a couple knowledge, skills, or abilities that you'd say are going to be universally critical for them to have?
Mm-hmm. So I would tell everybody go into something that motivates you. If you don't have motivation where you end up, you can succeed, but I think it's a lot less likely and you're not going to enjoy what you're doing. So try to figure out what that thing is that drives you. And in the case of what we do, we have bits of flexibility in what people can focus on. If you get into the job and you like strategy, that can be your thing. If you're somebody who likes processes, that can be your thing. If you're somebody who loves relationship building, that can be your thing. So even when you get into a role, if you're allowed to do so, make sure that whatever the thing is that you can go and add value that you like to do, if you have freedom to do it, go and focus on that. In terms of specific skills, we are so into data that I would tell people to keep up on, if at all possible, some kind of coding language. Historically, we've used things like SAS and SQL. I think now things are more along the lines of R and Python. But a lot of the data jobs out there, you're going to have to potentially learn that language and then move on to the next language. But being able to put data together, understand whether the data is accurate or not, and then how to turn that data into a story. Because just having the data and putting it in front of somebody doesn't necessarily help them. It's you translating into something that's meaningful.
Fascinating.
I agree with Tim in that, that is not just unique to revenue management. I think even in the global sales realm, we have many different sources of data, and unless you know how to interpret that data exclusively to what you're trying to accomplish, it's really no good to you. So what I would encourage students, whether it's a mock case study or whether it's some sort of an assignment, accomplish the task and find out, what the conclusion was, but also encourage yourself to think about other possible outcomes and other possible ways that such situations could maybe differ in the future. As far as the airline industry in particular, I agree with Tim. You have to be passionate about it. This is an industry where people find it very, very hard to leave for many different reasons. Obviously, aside from the business to business, from a personal perspective, the world is in your palms when it comes to travel. How many places some people that we've worked with have checked off their lists is pretty impressive in terms of traveling. So if you are interested in experiencing the cultures of the world, regardless of what airline you choose to work for, those doors open for you. I haven't looked back since.
Yeah, one of the big benefits in the airline industry, if you haven't heard, is flight benefits. So if there's seats at time of departure, then you're able to go and jump on it, at least at the U.S. carriers that we know about. And so especially in Dallas with the immense network that we have, people head to South America one weekend, Paris the next weekend, and half the discussions on Monday morning is where you went the previous weekend. So it's part of the excitement that exists just because it's there sitting, staring you in the face. Where's the empty seats? And, I'm going to just head wherever with this batch of people that I'm just coworkers with, or my family, or whoever.
That's a great segue into my final question. Favorite airplane in your fleet and why?
Oh, well, for me, it's 757, just because it can do so many things. It's not necessarily the cheapest plane to operate, but because it can do transatlantic as a narrow body, because it can do hot and high airports and be able to handle the load, I really, really like the 75 and how it looks.
Perfect.
My favorite's the A321 Transcon that we fly between New York and Los Angeles. So it's a narrow-body aircraft, pretty much retrofitted 2/3 of the way in premium cabins, whether first or business. Really caters to both, celebrity and heavy business traffic that happens between LA and New York. So if you ever get a chance to fly on that product, it's truly separates itself from others in the industry.
I love it. That's fantastic. I'm a big 7.8 guy. I really, the times that I've flown on it, it's incredibly quiet. I love the windows that automatically adjust to the cabin lighting, exterior lighting. So, but I think it's so exciting that you guys have one of the youngest fleets and constantly making efforts to continuously improve. You're aware of issues about fuel consumption, but passenger comfort, and creating that really high-end premium experience at 30,000 feet. So, gentlemen, I really appreciate you being on the Hospitality Spirit today. This was a fantastic conversation. I wish you nothing but the best, safe travels, and again, thank you very much.
Likewise, thanks for having us.
Thank you.